हेलो नमस्कार आदाब। आप देख रहे हैं मीडिया स्टार वर्ल्ड और मैं हूं आपका मेज़बान मोहम्मद अहमद काज़मी। ईरान के ख़िलाफ़ एक बार फिर जंग शुरू हो गई है। लेबनान के ख़िलाफ़ इजराइल के हमलों के रिएक्शन के तौर पर ईरान ने इजराइल पर हमले किए और उसके बाद हमले और जवाबी हमले हो रहे हैं। इस जंग के दौरान दुनिया का सियासी निज़ाम और फ़ौजी ताकत का बैलेंस तेज़ी से बदल रहा है। इंटरनेशनल मामलात के एक्सपर्ट सीनियर जर्नलिस्ट सईद नकवी ने ब्रिटेन के मारूफ सियासतदान जेरेमी कॉर्बिन से बहुत ही अहम इंटरव्यू किया है। जेरेमी बर्नार्ड कॉर्बिन 1983 से इस्लिंगटन नॉर्थ इलाके की पार्लियामेंट में नुमाइंदगी कर रहे हैं। फ़िलहाल वे आज़ाद मेंबर हैं और 2025 में ज़ारा सुल्ताना के साथ मिलकर बनाई गई योर पार्टी के पार्लियामेंट में रहनुमा हैं। कॉर्बिन समाजवादी ख़यालात रखने वाले नेता माने जाते हैं। वे 2015 से 2020 तक लेबर पार्टी के सरबराह और ब्रिटेन में अपोजिशन लीडर रहे हैं। 2024 में आज़ाद उम्मीदवार के तौर पर इलेक्शन लड़ने के बाद उन्हें लेबर पार्टी से खारिज कर दिया गया था। उनको आज भी ब्रिटेन की सियासत में काफ़ी अहमियत दी जाती है। ये सईद नकवी साहब के ज़रिए किया गया इंटरव्यू अंग्रेज़ी ज़बान में है। हिंदी में देखने से पहले ये छोटा सा वीडियो देखें जिसमें हिंदी सबटाइटल सेट करने का तरीक़ा सिखाया गया है। उम्मीद है आपको हमारी ये कोशिश पसंद आएगी।
YouTube पर हिंदी कैप्शन चालू करने के लिए वीडियो चलाएं, फिर ऊपर या नीचे दिखाई देने वाले CC कैप्शंस बटन पर क्लिक करें। अब सेटिंग्स पर जाएं, सबटाइटल्स CC चुनें और हिंदी सिलेक्ट करें। अगर हिंदी विकल्प न दिखे तो ऑटो ट्रांसलेट पर क्लिक करें और हिंदी चुन लें। बस अब वीडियो के कैप्शन हिंदी में दिखाई देंगे।
War in Iran had again resumed full throttle. How do you see this develop?
Incredibly dangerous and incredibly bad news that's come out this morning. The US and Israel are clearly determined at various levels to have a war with Iran, and Iran has obviously tried to defend itself, and I think the US was surprised at the military capability of Iran in all this. And I, like you, probably thought that there was a real possibility of some kind of agreement being reached between the US.
Would you say in this particular instance it is Trump and Netanyahu again holding hands, or are they contrary to each other?
I think they are holding hands, but they sometimes let go of each other. And I think Netanyahu is very powerful in his influence on Trump, which is interesting because effectively Israel is deciding US policy in the region.
Yes.
Israel has conducted the invasion of southern Lebanon, which clearly Trump does not want and has said so many times, made that very clear. But nevertheless, the security support and military support for Israel continues from the US.
Yes.
And Israel is essentially before our very eyes on the Great Israel Project.
I would have thought that in fact, one of the great successes of the Iranian enterprise has been the cleavage that they have been able to create between the United States and Israel.
Yes.
But from what you're saying they're still holding hands.
Well, at one level, there are clearly differences in that Trump has said, for example, yesterday that Israel should not bomb Iran. Trump has also said that Israel should not invade southern Lebanon. Now, that's Trump's public position, but the reality is that the rearming of Israel continues, the financial support for Israel continues, the diplomatic cover for Israel continues. So you ask yourself, is Trump actually being totally honest in saying all of this, or is this performative stuff to try to maintain some semblance of US relations with other Middle Eastern states? And so I think there is, how should we put it, two paths on diplomacy going on here. the US has, beyond an obsession with Iran, going back a very long time,
Yes.
going back to the 1950s with the coup, with the British and American coup against the government at that time, going back to the hostage crisis.
Muhammad Mossadegh in 1953.
Yeah,
And then, of course, after 1979 Islamic Revolution, the 444-day siege of the American embassy. That soured things a bit.
Yeah.
And it was a long period. Now, we are at a cusp of something more catastrophic than what we have already seen. Are we? Look, the Iranians are going to go for the jugular in as far as Israel is concerned. What then will Trump do? You see, there are three things in play here. One is Trump does not want Israel to attack anything in Lebanon. That's one. Netanyahu wants to carry the war into Lebanon and beyond and wants Trump with him. Now, they are both playing the Israel lobby in their own way. The Israel lobby, which is one of the most powerful lobbies anywhere in the world, gives him the signal that you go ahead and attack, and I will take care, we shall take care of Trump. Is something like that happening?
I think that's probably about right. Now, where this leads to is the horrifying and difficult question. The US and Israel clearly underestimated massively the Iranian military capacity, big time, because they assumed the initial bombing they did of Iran would shut Iran up, and effectively there would be, Trump assumed there was going to be popular uprising and regime change. There wasn't. And we now have this situation where the US is embarrassed by all of this, deeply unpopular war back home. And so Trump is now doing the best he can to persuade Netanyahu to hold back a bit, but it's not working. So Trump is now left in a very isolated position that he can't influence his major ally. Politically, he can't walk away from Israel because of the makeup of the US political structure, in his eyes anyway. And Israel will continue the Greater Israel Project. Iran fights back. What does Iran do then? Does it bring in allies to help it, looking at Russia or others? You have the incredible danger of a major war, a really major war in that region.
When you say major, you are thinking of the N word?
Yes, ultimately that. Now, Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons. Yes. And indeed, the previous leaders put a fatwa on nuclear weapons anyway. They have some enriched uranium, but they don't have any uranium that can make a nuclear weapon anyway. So nuclear weapons are not available for Iran, but nuclear weapons are held by Pakistan and Russia.
In recent days, there have been rumors, and credible rumors. People like Larry Johnson, who appears on television, on social media very often, formerly of the CIA, who quotes people, reliable sources, that the fatwa is now over as far as Iran is concerned. And therefore, we might be looking forward to surprises.
Well, I hope there are no new nuclear weapons in the region. And as one who spent my life campaigning to rid the world of nuclear weapons, I still adhere to that position. So there has to be a renewed effort globally to try and bring about some move that can.
Who is to make those moves? Who is to make those moves, Jeremy?
The obvious force would be the UN, but the obvious place that's not going to do it is the UN because of the makeup of the Security Council and that. So maybe it'll be down to Pakistan again. Maybe China will be involved in this because China has a massive economic interest in the region, oil supplies particularly. So I would look to what could happen via China and Pakistan at the moment.
There time was, just a few days ago, one could have said that in the two theaters of the war, Ukraine and Iran, the West was on the back foot in both these theaters, and that somehow they were being dragged on. Suddenly, one finds that the other theater, Ukraine, has warmed up, has hotted up suddenly more, and that the Ukrainians have realized the wonders of a thing called drones, and that they are in fact now targeting deep inside Russia. And how long will Putin be patient? I mean, that is an anxiety.
I think Putin will be forced into some renewed negotiations with Ukraine because politically, Putin must be under pressure for both the cost of the war, the longevity of the war, and the loss of military lives, Russian military lives, as well as Ukrainian military lives. If you think back to the war in Afghanistan, that eventually had a massive effect on the Soviet Union in that the anger of the population against what they saw as this ridiculous loss of life in this war.
Jeremy, if you could stand up a bit.
Sorry.
That's it.
Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon.
Yes.
And so I think that Putin will be forced into some form of negotiation. Now, he won't say he's forced into it. He'll probably find some other group to do it. The interesting and sad thing about the Ukraine war is that none of the world's institutions that one would normally think of as being an interlocutor to bring about a peace process have worked. The EU, the OSCE, the United Nations, none of whom have achieved or wanted to achieve very much. The only people that seriously tried were the African Union, the late Pope, and President Lula. There has to be a new initiative on Ukraine. And the European Union, for all its bellicosity about Ukraine, does actually need a great deal of gas and oil, mainly coming from Russia because of the proximity of it and the relative cost of it. And so I do think there may well be the economic pressures of China on the war in Iran and between Iran and Israel, and the European Union because of its the effects of the Ukraine war. It might well be there'll be some dramatic moves on this. I absolutely hope so, because the loss of life is absolutely unconscionable in all of these wars. But the Palestinian people, the back of all this, under occupation, and the acts of genocide continue in Gaza.
Yeah. Well, we were looking at a world in total and absolute transition. In other words, when the Ukraine war broke out, actually, in February 24th, even then, there was this big chant of the West in decline and the global order changing. And after the disastrous departure of the Americans from Afghanistan in August 2022, it seemed that it was all over, that in fact the relative balance of power had been decided, that the West had lost the hegemonic position. America, more or less, had lost the hegemonic position that it had. And now, where do we stand as far as the global reordering of power is concerned?
It's happening before our very eyes, and you and I look at, look at the news every day, and follow things every day. But look at the wider trend. The US military expenditure is as big or bigger than ever. Their military presence is absolutely enormous around the world, and the cost of it is huge. China, on the other hand, has a very fast-growing economy, very fast-rising living standards, and a very powerful industrial base, without huge levels of federal debt that the US has. So before our very eyes, the balance is moving away from the US towards China. And Trump tries to hit back with his national security strategy of last November, which is essentially we'll go wherever we want to pick up everybody else's natural resources. But then you just look at some signs of this. When the Chinese leadership invite African countries to come to a summit in Beijing, every single country goes. Every single country goes. The rest of the world, particularly the southern parts of the world, are looking much more to China than to the US or Europe. And I think we are witnessing this change before our very eyes. Look also at the internal politics in the USA, in that despite everything, the election of Mamdani in New York indicates that there are significant numbers of people in the USA that absolutely reject the Trump doctrine and the US traditional doctrine in favor of something very different. And I do think that electorally, the problems that Trump faces this autumn will influence a lot of what he does. This war in Iran is monumentally unpopular in the USA.
You talked of Zohran Mamdani, and you saw that as a positive signal in otherwise a bleak picture across the board. In fact, is there hope for the left? I mean, can one extrapolate from an experience, the mayoral election in New York, and say, well, there still are sparks of left common sense in other parts of the world?
I think one has to be cautious of over-extrapolating it, but it is nevertheless significant that Mamdani won the election on a left platform and his popularity has increased, if anything, since the election. The process in the US Democratic Party at the moment of challenging the Democrat establishment is happening all across the USA. And so there is going to be a big struggle within the US Democrats. And maybe there'll be splits down the line. I don't know. But I do think there is a political change in the USA. It's not to say Trump is not without support, but his support base is actually fairly narrow, whereas the Democrats are capable, one hopes, of mobilizing a much wider base on a slightly more radical platform than Kamala Harris put forward in the last presidential election.
Would you agree that the MAGA base, Make America Great Again base, in fact has been badly eroded and divided because the Christian nationalism, which is at the core of that MAGA appeal, they are up in arms against American lives being lost for a third country. I mean, this will be a big rolling movement there. And you have characters like Tucker Carlson, picking up huge ratings on that platform.
Well, Trump offered something a bit like Calvin Coolidge of the 1920s. He said, we'll keep out of the rest of the world and we'll make America strong, and everybody will have a car in the drive and a chicken in the oven, or a chicken in the fridge, or something like that. And that base was promised that there would be no more involvement in foreign wars and no more American soldiers dying around the world. Trump has not succeeded in doing that, and that's why he's terrified of getting involved in what would eventually be a ground war in Iran. Iran is a vast country. It is very well militarily prepared. It has massive human rights issues within Iran, which are not being addressed by anybody at the moment. But Trump knows that he's in a corner and in a hole because he hasn't kept up with what he said. And as you quite correctly observe, the MAGA base is actually contracting. Also, the MAGA base is not necessarily very wealthy people. They're the ones who have to pay for medical care they can't afford. They're the ones who suffer job losses. They're the ones whose communities are being destroyed and declining because of deindustrialization. Trump promised them all that would change. It hasn't.
Yes. But, to go back a little bit, because that interests me personally also, is this Zohran Mamdani, because that takes me back a little further. Say things like Syriza in Greece. There's a big spurt it took. You had Tsipras come up as the prime minister. Then you had Podemos in Spain, and in Portugal, you in fact had virtually communist parties in government, and so on and so forth. And then suddenly you find that the establishments plus the corporates, they get together and they smother these impulses or contain them. Like, for instance, Macron is doing in France with Mélenchon and his 4 or 5 team of leftists there. How do you explain this? What is at work?
The far right have been on the rise across Europe for quite a long time. They've always been there, essentially on an anti-immigrant, anti-refugee platform, and used the most disgusting elements of symbolism in order to promote that. Their growth has been helped by the retreatism of the centre ground and retreatism of social democratic parties using much the same language. You listen to Keir Starmer talking about the problems of boat people coming from France and going on and on about it and promising to do something about it. And you realise all this is doing is playing into the hands of reform. Across Europe, yes, there is a rise of the far right, but there's also, interestingly, a coming together of the left against the militarism of the continent and on economic issues. So, for example, on next Sunday, I'll be in Brussels. We're holding a rally against European militarism and the effect it has on social spending all across the country, all across the continent, rather. We're doing a big anti-war conference, which has been massively oversubscribed in London the following weekend, and that's a Europe-wide thing being held in Central Hall, Westminster, where the UN once met. And so there is a growth of a movement which is about social justice and peace. The left is often very good at dividing itself up on all this, but I do think the likelihood of left groups across Europe coming together is actually quite high. I met some people from Germany last week, from Die Linke and other parties. They are not an overwhelmingly strong force at the moment, but they are a growing force in German politics in both East and West. That is essentially a social justice economic message they're putting forward in retaliation to the barrenness of the far-right message. Because once they've blamed immigrants for every single problem there is in the world, what are they left with other than repression?
Now, this business of immigrants, migration, and all the identity issues and this kind of politics. Now, does it grow out of political parties and their think tanks, or is it basically a problem of capitalism? In other words, or let me come back further. The media. Who controls the media? Who controls the media gets the results. So the media is totally and absolutely, so far, it is in rebellion today on the West Asian crisis, much more because of the social media having taken over. There's no credibility left with the mainstream as far as we are concerned in this part of the world. I don't know how it is going on in England, for instance. But here, people are more and more turning to Professor Morsheimer or Jeffrey Sachs or Colonel McGregor and others on the social media who are, in fact, interpreting what is going on much more sensibly. The events in West Asia.
You and I have grown up in a world where there were major newspapers and major television channels which essentially directed public debate and public thinking. BBC in Britain, USA equivalents, and so on. The growth of the technology that enables the social media has actually changed all of that. Newspaper readership is diminished to almost nothing in most parts of Europe. And indeed, I don't know anyone under 40 or 50 who ever buys a newspaper. I sometimes do this as a test at public meetings. Who has bought a newspaper in the last month? Most of the hands stay down. And likewise, the influence on public debate by the major news channels and major newspapers actually is reducing all the time, and they can't quite get over it. And most of us actually rely for our news information on a whole plethora of news sources. You and I, I'm sure, both look at social media quite a lot. We look at a variety of TV channels, Al Jazeera, France 24, BBC, US channels as well, and so on. And so the ability to control debate is reduced. But the strange thing is that in a world where it is possible to pick up one of these, our mobile phone, and find out almost anything anywhere in the world straight away, we don't do that. What we do is click on to whatever WhatsApp group we're in, click on to whatever our favorite news streaming channel is, and rely on that. So despite having unprecedented ability to find everything out, we don't do it. What we do is go back into the narrowest of narrowest.
Why is that so?
People feel more comfortable getting news from their friends than they do from elsewhere. And so they tend to go into echo chambers all the time. So if you start following what goes on social media, various channels are actually echo chambers for each other, and views are often unchallenged. And I find this very hard to understand why this should be the case, because there's never been greater opportunities to find anything and everything out, yet people are not taking it. And so we then end up with the politics of the rumor mill and the politics of exaggeration. And so the way in which the far right operate across Europe is with the most ludicrous stories you could ever imagine about the alleged behavior of alleged refugees, grotesque levels of exaggeration about numbers, but at no stage looking at the humanitarian, the human side of it. Thousands, tens of thousands of people have died crossing the Mediterranean between Libya and Italy over the past decade and a half. Tens of thousands. And where is the outrage about it? What's the historians of the next century going to say about the politicians of this part of the 21st century that were apparently ignorant of what was happening before their very eyes?
Jeremy, assuming that you have more or less played one part of your innings, and Bernie Sanders across the seas has played his, and yet your time seems to be there. I mean, do you see this paradox interesting?
Well, yes. I spend a lot of time, obviously, representing my constituency and all the issues that face it. And I draw my strength and knowledge from the people that I represent, who are a wonderful, amazing variety of people from all over the world. There are 70
Jeremy, you are a victim of the media campaign against you. And I remember it because I was in London and I watched it. What was that for?
Because it wasn't just about me personally. It was because what we represented was two things. One was an economic alternative of public ownership, public participation, an inclusive economic system within the UK. The establishment and the right-wing media didn't like that one little bit. What they disliked even more was the worldview that I took. The worldview that I took and take, which is one about disarmament, which is about peace, which is about recognizing the real dangers to this planet are what? Environmental, global inequality and injustice, and the rise of militarism. Last year, the world spent almost $3 trillion on arms. $3 trillion. And this year it will be even more and growing even further. And so the right-wing argument is that we spend more and more on arms in order to be prepared for the next war. Well, surely the best thing to do is not spend all that money on arms, but actually look at the causes of war, look at the injustices that bring it about. And so whilst we're looking at the wars in Ukraine, in Sudan, in Congo, obviously Iran, Lebanon, and Palestine, we surely have to be saying we want to look for peace. What I find so depressing about the government in Britain is that all through the King's Speech program for this Parliament that's on now, the session that's on now, where's the words about peace? Where's the words about the UN? Where's the words about international aid? Where's the words about social justice? Answer, there is none. It's all about market economics.
Yes, yes, yeah. Well, something interesting has happened in this part of the world, Jeremy, that you may not have noticed, or maybe you have. A week ago, or 10 days ago, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, reacting to the growing numbers of the unemployed, made a remark that the unemployed are like cockroaches. Cockroaches. Now, someone latched on to that phrase, and they launched a cockroach Janata Party, and online, on Instagram. And lo and behold, within 3 or 4 days, there were 22 million
cockroaches,
people who had registered for that, more than the ruling BJP. And this is what is going on now. If you had this material, how would you mold it?
Well, I would say this, that cockroaches can survive anything. Cockroaches survive nuclear war the lot. And so I think the Lord Chief Justice should be careful in his choice of language. And I do think that sometimes it's an instant symbolism thing like that mobilizes lots of people and makes them think again. Rather like in the US, that quite clever movement, No More Kings. Very clever, because it plays into the whole narrative of US independence. Fantastic. So let's use that symbolism. Are we both cockroaches?
Right. The one more turn on the identity politics, which has possessed us in India, in this part of the world. Now, if you talk of the bread and butter issues, and bread and butter issues are talked about here, say in India, immediately the government then begins to react to that bread and butter issues. And the solution towards bread and butter issues leads to raising of finances through further taxation and capitalists. Now, what happens is the capitalist controls the media totally. The mainstream media is controlled by them. They have a compact with the state. This is straightforward. There is nothing very subtle about it. They hold hands with the government and say, okay, we'll give you will come to power. The entire media will be supporting you. And then at the end of the day, when the dust settles down and your cabinet has been formed, then we will need about 7 airports. We will need all the naval ports. We'll need this, that, and the other. And it carries on and on and on. This is the basis why, and emotion, therefore, if you're not going to talk about bread and butter, then you talk about Hindu and Muslim, then you talk about caste, then you talk about people infiltrating from Bangladesh, and these emotive issues, the issues which then become the staple. And they have become the staple for the reasons I have mentioned.
Absolutely. And this is the old tactic of the right from time immemorial, that you find a minority to blame for something. We had the 1980s, we had all the attacks on gay people in Britain. They called AIDS the gay plague. We had all the attacks on the LGBT community later on. We have the attacks on trans people. We have the attacks on refugees, on migrants, and so on and so on, all of which creates a huge furore, which actually deliberately distracts away from fundamental issues like child poverty, homelessness, hunger, access to food banks, and so on, all in the case of the UK. And so it is important that the left always recognise that you have to do two things. You have to defend those minorities that are under attack. You have to stand up for the principles of identity and human rights. But above all, you've got to be absolutely clear on the economic.
But you need the media for that.
I do.
Jeremy, where's the media?
Yes. Largely, I do blame the media for that. And are things changing? Yes, I do think they are changing. And I do think there is a growing realization that we do have to have a different economic system that is environmentally sustainable, but above all is one of equality. The grotesque levels of inequality cannot continue to get worse, but that means challenging an awful lot of the economic orthodoxy which dominates most of our governments at the present time. Yeah. So we're in a bad situation, but in a bad situation, you have to talk of peace, you have to talk of hope, and you have to talk of equality.
Jeremy, I won't let you go before, because you have a reputation, you had a reputation of being great friends with the late Hugo Chavez.
Yes.
And his protege, Nicolas Maduro, one big country just flies in, picks him up from his bedroom and his wife, and no one knows where they are. I mean, something similar happened with Noriega many years ago. Where are they? Is there some due process going on? Are they being tried? Or they have just been locked up in the basement?
First of all, what the US did to Maduro was absolutely, completely and totally illegal in any conceivable way. That they fly in, as you say, seize the president and his partner and take them off to prison in the USA, where they keep saying there is going to be a due process. He is legally represented in the USA. And the current government in Venezuela is trying to get him back, but not very successfully at the present time. This is exactly what the Trump National Strategic Document of last November pointed out, was they were going to not accept what they called foreign influences in Latin America. I was in Cuba last month on a medical aid delegation. We took a lot of medical aid with us, and we had a lot of very good discussions with the Cuban government, Cuban people, and many others. They are obviously very, very worried. When the US deploys all the military in the region, puts an aircraft carrier into Kingston Harbor in Jamaica, which is, of course, very, very near to Cuba, they fear the very worst. The strangulation of Cuba is disgraceful and disgusting. And so we need to appeal to all of our governments. What's wrong with them? That they're so frightened of Trump and the USA, they can't do the basic thing of sending some oil and some aid to Cuba.
Yes. Has the Bolivarian revolution survived?
Yes, I think it has in many ways. And I was just looking, for example, at the election results coming in from Peru, which indicate it's quite possible the left has won the position in Peru. The Colombian election, the first round was not great, but not a disaster for the left, and I think they could well win on the second round. And likewise, Lula's election coming up later this year will be a crucial one. So has the Bolivarian revolution in principle survived? Yes. But clearly there are huge challenges ahead. And what happens the US and Cuba is actually quite fundamental to this, because if the US actually does the worst and invades Cuba, that is not going to end there, because they've got to then occupy. They've then got to control. I don't think they can do that. And I don't think Trump or others have actually got the stomach for deploying US troops around the world. The Achilles heel for Trump is the illogical nature of the way in which he was elected, in which he promised the biggest army in the world that wouldn't be involved in doing any fighting anywhere in the world. He's now got the biggest military force in the world in terms of firepower, but he's now got involved in a number of conflicts around the world, and that's likely to get worse. So I think we should also look very carefully at the politics of what's happening within the USA.
Final question, Jeremy. How does India and how does Mr. Modi look to you from that distance?
I feel very sad for much of what's happened in India, for the attacks on trade unions, the attacks on civil and human rights, but I'm also inspired by that indomitable spirit of much of the Indian population to actually fight back. That population that fought back against British imperialism, that population that has fought back against this kind of thing. So I'm full of hope, and I'm looking forward to another visit to India in the not too distant future.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. Thank you very much.